number 5 we have Goldfield, Arizona. Being deemed as one of Arizona's most haunted places, we have the town of Goldfield. Founded in 1893, Goldfield was a promising land for gold mining. The town grew rapidly, gaining 1,500 residents during its first year. The space was quick to build businesses including stores, a blacksmith, a butcher, a brewery, and 3 saloons. Though the town of Goldfield met its fall just as quickly as it was built up. After 5 short years, the gold ran out and people began to dwindle, eventually leaving it fully abandoned, securing its ghost town status. Being classified as a ghost town doesn't necessarily mean a place is haunted by ghosts, but this is not the case for the Goldfield ghost town. There's plenty of documentation and investigations that point to Goldfield being a paranormal active ground. It is known that a mysterious figure lurks within the shadows of the Goldfield ghost town, Bordello. It is unclear who this spirit would have been in life, yet it is commonly believed he was once a miner who lived in the town. Unexplainable knocks and bangs are heard in the building, and some unfortunate visitors have been scratched. This activity is attributed to a dark character who's usually seen wearing a cowboy hat. Just on the horizon of the Goldfield ghost town sits a landscape made ominous by its name and the legend surrounding it. The Superstition Mountains are cloaked in mystery and at the center of many fables, making them notorious among the paranormal community. The Superstition Mountains carry many secrets, the most famous being the location of a supposed deposit of gold and riches in the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. A curse has kept this treasure safe since the days of Goldfield's mining boom. Many have set out to locate these riches, and many have returned empty-handed or found only death. Countless adventurers have perished in the Arizona heat pursuing this chase. Their ghosts are said to now haunt the mountainside. Other secrets of the mountain have people believing that the hill is a place where evil spirits hid and told stories of a devil that lived behind the mountain. There's also a rumored apparition of a hugely tall skeleton named the Borrego Phantom, which appears to those exploring the mountain after dark. Another layer of creepiness is added to the mountain by the local legend that reptile-looking people surface there after dark. All of these creepy mysteries are summed up pretty nicely in the Superstition Mountain's name. In at number 4 we have Glen Rio, New Mexico. Found on the state border of Texas and New Mexico lies the town of Glen Rio. Founded in 1901, it was a town where wheat and cattle farmers settled and grew a community. Being divided between 2 states made for some unusual customs in Glen Rio. The mail would arrive at a train depot on the Texas side, but would have to be transported to the post office on the New Mexico side. The Texas side was part of a dry county, so all the bars were on the New Mexico side. Because the gasoline tax was higher in New Mexico, all the service stations were on the Texas side. By 1920, Glen Rio had a hotel, a hardware store, and a land office, as well as several grocery stores, service stations, and cafes. Though Glen Rio's permanent population never rose above 30 people, the town survived with its tourist-based businesses catering to the many travelers along Route 66. By 1985, only 2 residents remained in the small town, and the Texas post office was the only business open. It too has long since closed. Other buildings have overgrown sites, missing windows, or debris surrounding them. The detritus of 4 decades when Glen Rio welcomed tens of thousands, fed and entertained them, and sent them on their way towards Chicago or California. In at number 3 we have Nevada City in Montana. Miners settled in Nevada City in 1963, along with establishing their homes and businesses in this new town. Located in southwestern Montana, the town is 1.5 miles from Virginia City. The town was thriving up until 1876 when the gold miners moved to other promising sites. In 1896, the Connery Placer Mining Company destroyed most of the city's buildings. The company dredged the gulch and later abandoned it, leaving heavy wooden barges. This abandoned town being haunted is old news, as the Nevada City Hotel is reported to be frequented by the apparition of a road agent who lost their life nearby, according to online sources. Visitors have also reported hearing footsteps in the hallways and seeing shadowy figures standing behind their reflections in mirrors. Additionally, the spirit of an older cowboy figure who never speaks but lurks in the hotel rooms and even sits at the bar in the Virginia City. Back when the hotel operated, guests also complained of a weeping woman, always in the same room, only to be told there was no guest in the room in question. In at number 2 we have Custer, Idaho. The mining town town of Custer was born in 1879 by gold miners looking for their next gold hotspot. Prospectors discovered gold in what would become known as the Yankee Fork area of central Idaho in 1867. The area was worked on a small scale for more than a decade before the discovery of General Custer Mine. The General Custer Mining Company closed in 1888 and the district experienced a sharp decline. In 1899, the town of Custer has 5 saloons, 3 stores, a hotel and 3 boarding houses, but the town never established even one church. By 1910, most of the mines in the area were closed, and the Yankee Fork's boom years came to an end. The combined population of Custer and the nearby Bonanza was just 66 people. The Silver Messenger reports just 2 families remaining in Custer in 1911, and then being fully abandoned the year following. Today, it has been purchased by the U.S. Forestry Service and, in conjunction with the Friends of Custer Society, is slowly being made into a historic site. Some original buildings have already been renovated, some are in process, and many others are slated to be restored. Several buildings lost in a 1960s grass fire are due to be replaced with replicas. The Forgotten Town is a landmark for many people such as tourists and especially paranormal investigators. In the old schoolhouse is a museum containing items left behind and showcases the town's unique history. Although interesting, you can't help but get an eerie feeling thinking about the people who once owned these items, as walking into one of these structures is like walking back in time. To think this town was once active with human energy and miners working every single day. And finally, in at number 1, we have South Pass City, Wyoming. Only about 10 miles north of the Oregon Trail is the shell of a town that used to be a busy gold mining camp. Established in a small valley along the banks of Willow Creek, the town was born in 1867. The town was built there because gold was discovered in the Wind River Mountains. By 1868, South Pass City boasted over 250 buildings, 1,000 people, and hundreds of claims. The town was extremely busy as its half-a-mile-long main street boasted numerous hotels, restaurants, general stores, 2 newspapers, doctors, a bowling alley, and dozens of saloons. The mining district continued to grow to as many as 3,000 residents. Miners looking for investors and newspapers promoting further settlement in the area exaggerated the region's amount of gold. But for South Pass City, its great success wouldn't last, and just 2 years after its establishment would begin to show its first signs of declining. Hitting a fall in early 1869, the town resurged briefly after outsider capital was poured into the area, but would fall again as expenses and hardships to recover the gold proved too costly for most miners. By 1872, the town was only occupied by only a few hundred people. In the end, South Pass would become a permanent ghost town. By 1949, the last of the pioneer families had moved on from South Pass City, and the buildings had fallen into disrepair. The grounds of the old town are known to be haunted, and Highway 287 that follows the route of the Oregon Trail over South Pass, which is the reason South Pass City ever existed, has had its fair share of ghost sightings. According to a local ghost story, a woman was driving home from a long day in Denver. Her friend had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. After passing through Jeffrey City, the driver spotted a dark, hunched figure walking toward the road in the sagebush. About a half-mile later, she saw the same figure closer to the road. She noted his pig coat as he became clearer. About a half-mile later, still thinking about this man and his surprising reappearance, she reached over to wake her friend and request she take a turn driving. As her friend awoke, she saw the same man at the edge of the road, just crossing the white line onto the highway next to the car. Screaming, they accelerated away and compared descriptions. It was certainly the same man. In at number 5, we have Grafton, Utah. Located just a few miles away from Zion National Park in Utah, the now abandoned town of Grafton can be found. The town was originally established in 1859 when 5 Mormon families nearby were led to establish a town they called Wheeler to plant cotton, which would have been a profitable commodity during the Civil War. After only 2 years, the town was struck by a massive flood starting on January 8th of 1862 that washed away the entire town. However, the pioneers did not give up that easily and moved about a mile upstream and founded a new town named Grafton. They grew cotton, alfalfa, and wheat, but life was harsh and many residents lost their life due to the diseases and various accidents. The mortality rate was also extremely high, high, which accounts for about 77 total graves in the nearby cemetery. The town flourished for a while despite recurring floods, with a church and adobe schoolhouse being built in 1886, but when the Hurricane Canal was built in 1906, many families started to move to Rockville and Hurricane, and by 1920 only 3 families remained in the town, and in 1944 the town's last residents, Frank Russell and his wife Ellen, moved as well. And although the town is now well maintained by the non-profit volunteer organisation of the Grafton Heritage Partnership Project, its dark past can still be felt when exploring the area. People have reported hearing ghostly footsteps over the creaky floors in the empty buildings, as well as the breath of ghostly souls on the back of their necks. The entire town gives visitors a feeling as if being watched, and the shadowy figures can sometimes be spotted in the windows. Another visitor of the ghost town visited the basement of the Russell home and claimed that they found a chair sitting in the middle of the basement with a mark on it as if someone had recently sat on it. They had been exploring for over an hour at this point and had not encountered another person on the way to town or the entire time they were there, but for some reason the print looked brand new, with not a single speck of dust on it. After filming for a few moments in the basement and recording into the silence, they felt a rush of air, as if someone had just walked past them, which scared them, and they decided it was time to leave. There are even rumours of skinwalkers lurking in the area. Even the cemetery itself has many reports of people hearing crying, laughing and chilling screams, especially late in the day and when it's overcast. Some people have even seen a woman in a dress with her hair in a bun walking around the cemetery sobbing, but when they approached her she disappeared into thin air. There is no doubt that there is definitely a very uncomfortable feeling while walking around the gravestones, which isn't surprising knowing the sad history of the people laid to rest there. In at number 4 we have Deadwood, South Dakota. The town of Deadwood is located in South Dakota and gained attraction in the gold rush of 1876. In 1875, a miner named John B. Pearson found gold in a narrow canyon in these northern Black Hills. This canyon became known as Deadwood Gulch because of many dead trees that lined the canyon walls at the time. Practically overnight, the tiny gold camp boomed into a town that played by its own rules that attracted outlaws, gamblers and gunslingers along with gold seekers. At its height, the city had a population of 5,000, attracting larger-than-life Old West figures back then. The business district comprised largely of saloons, dance halls, card parlors, and bodacious bordellos. They were all hungry for gold and did whatever they had to in order to get some. The business did whatever they could to serve the gold diggers, and sometimes that led to a little bit of conflict. Because of this, the now ghost town still lives with stories of its dead residents haunting present-day hotels and saloons. In 1876, Deadwood survived a smallpox epidemic that nearly wiped out the whole town. There were so many infected that multiple tents were erected to quarantine the stricken. In addition, it suffered 3 major fires. One devastating fire occurred on September 26, 1879, destroying more than 300 buildings and consuming the belongings of many inhabitants. Many numerous economic hardships also followed, pushing it to the verge of becoming another Old West ghost town. One of the most paranormally active sites in the ghost town is the Adam House. Built in 1892 after owner W.E. Adams had a stroke on the premises, his wife was so disturbed by the sounds of his ghost still walking around, rocking the rocking chairs and so forth, that she moved and left the house untouched, exactly as it was when he died. Now visitors and employees report having seen a rocking chair rock on its own, encountered a shadowy man standing at an upstairs window, and heard voices and footsteps in rooms throughout the house. In at number 3 we have Garnet, Montana. Found in Montana, the abandoned town of Garnet was another gold rush town that drew thousands of hopeful miners. Between 1862 and 1916, gold was mined from the area. During the peak of the town, it had hotels, saloons, schools, and stores in the midst of the town's biggest years. A 1912 fire burned down half of the town, and what was lost was not rebuilt. Many of the remaining structures were in poor condition even when they were lived in and regularly visited. This marked the decline of the town, as after 1917 the mine began to offer less and less, and by the time of World War I the town was almost fully abandoned. Garnet is perhaps the best preserved ghost town in the state of Montana. There are plenty of people who believe the abandoned buildings are still home to some of the residents who once lived there. Some visitors have reported hearing laughter and music coming from Kelly's Saloon, which is the most common occurrence. I quote, "We didn't experience anything bordering on the supernatural during our visit, but we did find the beautifully preserved artifacts to be windows into Garnet's incredible past." Coming in at number 2 we have Jerome, Arizona. Located in Arizona, you will find the ghost town of Jerome. Once a copper mining town, Jerome was the 3rd largest town in the early 1900s. Its streets were filled with 37 saloons, 13 13 bordellos, and a meager 4 churches in 1917, and again in 1926 after a mine blast damaged the original. A series of ill-fated events at this site would almost lead one to call it cursed. When the Great Depression hit, conditions in the town took a sharp downturn. Plagued with man-made disasters and poor fortune, Jerome's population gradually dwindled from thousands to somewhere between 20 to 50 residents. Finally, in 1950, the town was abandoned for good. A number of visitors have recounted other mysterious sightings. Visual apparitions range from human-shaped figures that roam the halls and stairways of the old hotel to a friendly animal that is said to scratch and meow at the doors. Additionally, one of the town's most well-known ghosts is said to lurk at the town's community center. Formerly called Lawrence Memorial Hall, the building is more often familiarly termed Spook Hall due to several strange happenings. With all the other apparitions wandering about this historic town, the cemetery, of course, known as the most haunted place in the whole town. Visitors here have made numerous reports of dark figures moving about, the sound of ethereal footsteps, and the sounds of distant voices. The old cemetery includes graves dating from 1897 to 1942. And finally, in at number 1, we have Cerro Gordo, California. Cerro Gordo is a ghost town located in Death Valley and is considered one of the best abandoned places in California. Cerro Gordo means fat hills in Spanish. It was named this for the vast amount of silver it contained. By the end of 1869, the city flourished and became well known for its promising business. By 1871, Cerro Gordo was well established as a mining town. The American Hotel was completed that year, as were several other permanent structures, a general store, restaurants, and saloons. At its height, the town had 5,000 residents. In 1875, Cerro Gordo suffered a series of setbacks, necessitating the shutdown of its furnaces. These problems resulted from a scarcity of ore in the mine, which had lasted for several months, and the temporary drying up of its water supply. In addition, by late 1876, a fire accident happened through some of the mine buildings and the union shaft, and the furnaces were closed the following February due to the disaster. A more lethal blow was dealt by falling lead and silver prices, effectively ending this era of activity at Cerro Gordo. Because of all the tragedy that occurred in Cerro Gordo, there's been multiple paranormal investigations held at the grounds of the abandoned town. While the new owner of the town was purchasing it, he was warned that they might have some visitors hanging around, and by visitors they meant spirits. One of the now owner's ghost stories goes along the lines of, as he was walking toward the bunkhouse, he looked at the window, the curtain pulled to the side, and a little face poked out. Under the assumption that the contractors were staying in the bunkhouse, he asked when they were leaving, and he was told that they're gone for 2 weeks. So a little uneasy, he locked up the door and went for a hike. By the time he got back, the kitchen light was on, even with the lock still on the door. At number 5, we have Bodhi, California. Located up in the Bodhi Hills in Mono County, California, near Yosemite, in 1859, 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodhi died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodhi was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned to a well-populated town. Though, like most mining towns, it saw its peak, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century, a series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. Dinner tables are still set up, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel is held up by a beam have been left untouched for 100 years. Though since it has been left and abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in crumbling state of decay, while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 16 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodhi has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from the abandoned buildings. They take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodhi. Thus, the curse of Bodhi emerged where if you take something from Bodhi, bad luck luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass, or their romantic life to tank from stealing from Bodhi. Coming in at number 4 we have Bannock, Montana. The once bright star of Montana is now a ruin, a town in arrested decay, with few remaining storefronts, saloons and hotels. The town was founded in 1862 when a group of Pikes Peakers from the goldfields of Colorado set up camp on the banks of the creek. Finding gold, the miners staked claims and promptly failed to keep the find a secret. By the spring of 1863 the area boasted a population of 5,000. By 1864 Bannock had started to fade, losing importance. The remnants of the past still exist with empty buildings and weathered wood. Today over 60 structures remain standing, most of which can be explored. The town is known as a site for paranormal activity. It is known that ghosts of the abandoned town walk the streets of Bannock. The most common ghost story though is the story of Dorothy Dunn. In August 1916, Dorothy Dunn, her cousin Fern and a friend waded into a dredge pond and stepped into deep water, but none of the three knew how to swim. Luckily a passerby was able to save both Fern and the friend, but Dorothy was not as lucky. Today the site of the tragic drowning is referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometime after the accident, Bertie saw a ghost of her friend upstairs in the hotel of the town. She recognized Dorothy by her long blue dress. Although Bertie rarely discussed the sightings, other visitors began to report seeing the spirit of a young girl in a long blue dress in the window of the hotel. Others have reported cold spots and some have reported trying to speak to the girl in a long blue dress. Bannock was filled with adult workers, crimes, murders, and of course the notorious sheriff and outlaw Henry Plummer, whose vast gang terrorized and robbed southwest Montana for years. Henry Plummer was handsome, well-dressed and charismatic. He was also able to gain the trust of the area miners and was soon elected sheriff of the community. However, little did the citizens of Bannock know, but their new sheriff led a secret band of road agents called the Innocents, who began to terrorize the travelers between Bannock and Virginia City, robbing and ending more than 100 men over the next several months. Once caught for his terrible actions, Henry Plummer met his fatal end at the hands of the town's citizens. Today many say that the ghost of Henry Plummer haunts this old settlement. Perhaps he wants to avenge his name. In at number 3 we have Thurmond, West Virginia. The historic town of Thurmond, located in the heart of New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurmond in the 1880s. Captain Thurmond passed in 1910, but the town continued its growth. During its height in the 1920s, the town was flourishing with a number of businesses and facilities in the railway industry. Thurmond had 2 banks, 2 hotels, stores, a cinema and offices, yet after a series of setbacks, Thurmond soon went from boom to bust. A number of factors played a role in the town's slow decline. The first problem was the increased rail competition and the emergence of cars. Then in 1930 a fire that led to the closure of the biggest hotel in the town, the Dunglen Hotel, only furthered the decline. The final fate of the town was the Great Depression, and by 1950 Thurmond was a ghost town. Thurmond saw a small revival during World War II when coal was in high demand, but it was not enough. Afterward the coal fields began to play out. Today Thurmond stands at just 5-person population, which is why it is nearly vacant ghost town, as the remaining residents either move on or pass away. The house and the land it sits on became the property of the National Park Service. Walking around Thurmond today is a sad reminder of the countless other boom towns which once thrived with human activity, but today are silent and forgotten. Many buildings have long since disappeared, either torn down or, as in the case of the well-loved hotel, burnt to the ground in suspicious circumstances. Many of the family homes lie in increasingly decaying condition, while some have disappeared altogether, leaving only behind a white picket fence and wildflowers which still blossom untended each year. The eerie atmosphere of Thurmond led many visitors to believe that this almost abandoned town is haunted. In at number 2 we have Cahaba Ghost Town. Alabama is home to many small towns. While some of these towns have very few residents, others are true ghost town because they've been completely abandoned. It's no secret that small abandoned towns give off an eerie vibe. As a matter of fact, one Alabama ghost town in particular that fits the bill is Old Cahaba. The small town of Old Cahaba is located in Dallas County. From 1820 to 1826, this small town served as Alabama's first state capital. Before the Civil War, Cahaba was a busy trade city located at the junction of the Alabama and Cahaba rivers. Over the years, floods and decay have affected this historical town. Thus, by 1900, the town was completely abandoned. Today, Old Cahaba is Alabama's most famous ghost town. Many buildings still stand, like the church, schoolhouse, and some houses. However, they have been left untouched for decades. You can still walk the streets of Cahaba and see the ruins and abandoned buildings, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for the ghostly orbs that have been reported to appear in the garden maze at the home of CC Pegs. Additionally, many locals share similar ghost stories from the ghost town. While it's known that Cahaba is filled with paranormal activity, one groundskeeper that works at the new Cahaba cemetery has reported hearing voices as they worked. While tourist groups claim to have recordings of unusual sounds, and others say they've captured unexplained lights or shadows in photographs. Another site that's reportedly haunted is the Barker House. This mansion was built in 1860 by Stephen Barker and contained slave quarters behind the house. After people started leaving the town in 1870s, the house was bought by Samuel McGurdy Kirkpatrick. It burned in 1935 and was rebuilt, but today it's in pretty bad condition. The only people usually left inside are paranormal investigators. Reports from said investigators include seeing a ball rolling across the floor on its own, and a stuffed animal appearing to communicate with something else in the room. But the most well-known haunting in Cahaba is Pegg's ghost. Colonel Christopher Claudius Peggs was the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment and was wounded leading a charge at the Battle of Seven Pines in Virginia in May 1862. He died from his wounds 2 months later, on July 15th. As the story goes, the couple were walking behind Pegg's home in the spring of 1862. As they walked, they spotted a ball of light. They tried to touch it, but their hands went right through it. It disappeared, but later came back and followed the couple. Due to all the mysterious crimes that happened in association to Pegg, seeing an orb around his former house is considered a bad omen and possibly even a supernatural warning. And finally, in at number 1, we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. Located in a quiet valley of Columbia County, Pennsylvania, is one of the state's least likely and least publicized tourist attractions. Centralia, Pennsylvania, once thriving with 14 active coal mines and 2,500 residents in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s, its thriving business and population hit a decline, and most of its mines were abandoned. Still at that point, over 1,000 people still resided in the town, and Centralia was far from dying until a coal mine fire began below. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the never-ending coal tunnels that miners dug thousands of feet below the surface. And despite repeated attempts to extinguish the flames, the fire still burns to this day. 20 years after the fire started, however, Centralia, Pennsylvania began to feel the effects of its underground fire, as residents started passing out in their homes from carbon monoxide poisoning. The trees began to die and the ground turned to ash. Roads and sidewalks began to buckle. But some residents didn't want to leave despite the health risks. And for the next 10 years, legal battles and personal arguments between neighbors became the norm. The local newspaper even published a weekly list of who was leaving. Finally, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain in 1993, by which point only 63 residents remained. Officially, they became squatters in houses they had owned for decades. In 2013, the remaining residents, which were fewer than 10, won a settlement against the state. Each was awarded $349,500 and ownership of their properties until they die, at which point Pennsylvania will seize the land and finally demolish what structures remain. Number 5, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo, Colorado was a former gold mining camp in Chaffee Country. Today, it is one of the best preserved ghost towns in Colorado, as the entire district was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. The area was originally settled in 1878 and was made official in 1880, when gold and silver began to bring many people to the area. At one point, the population reached more than 2,000 people. In 1881, the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad came through the area and a station was built in St. Elmo. From here, the tracks continued to Romley, Hancock, and through the historic Alpine Tunnel. St. Elmo was considered the main source of supplies arriving by train for the area settlers, and eventually several merchandise stores, 5 hotels, a telegraph office, a town hall, 5 restaurants, 2 sawmills, a schoolhouse, a weekly newspaper called The Mountaineer, and numerous saloons and dance halls filled the town. The miners worked at several mines throughout the area that were rich in silver, gold, copper, and iron. In 1890, a fire destroyed the business section and the town was never entirely rebuilt. This was about the same time that St. Elmo's peaked in population with about 2,000 residents. Afterward, many of the mines were depleted and many miners moved out of the area. More mines continued to fail in the ensuing years and the closure of the Alpine Tunnel in 1910. The state of the structures paired with depleting mines led many in the community in search of new, more prosperous mining towns to call home. The railroad continued to run until 1922, and it has been said that the rest of St. Elmo's population rode the last train out of town, never to return. In 1969, the United States recognized St. Elmo as a historic district, and soon after, it became a unique tourist attraction that's open to the public, showcasing what life was like in the Old West. There is no shortage of urban legends and reports of hauntings in St. Elmo, but the most common occurrence of paranormal activity centers around the town's most notable family. To this day, one of the members of the Stark family still can be spotted in the ghost town. Anton's only daughter Annabelle resided there until she died in 1960. As legend has it, Annabelle continued her promise to protect the city even after she took her last breath. In at number 4 we have Rhyolite, Nevada. Founded in 1904 and abandoned by 1916, Rhyolite was one of several short-lived boom towns from the late gold rush era. People were drawn to the desert on the edge of Death Valley by the promise of gold found amongst quartz in local mines. And by 1906 the town had all the promising indicators of permanence and the largest population in the area. The town's citizens had an active social life, including baseball games, dances, basket socials, whist parties, tennis, a symphony, Sunday school picnics, basketball games, Saturday night variety shows at the Opera House, and pool tournaments. In 1906, Countess Majowski opened the Alaska Glacier Ice Cream Parlor to the delight of the local citizenry. That same year, an enterprising miner, Tom T. Kelly, built a bottle house out of 50,000 beer and liquor bottles. But in 1907, the US financial markets were rocked by panic that saw closures of banks, businesses, and mines. Rhyolite began to falter. The mine closed in 1911. Some claim that Rhyolite, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas, was once home to thousands of people, though not much remains of its glory days, which lasted less than 20 years. Set up in 1905, the town was a mining hotspot, but after the richest ore was exhausted, workers left for a new pasture, and the population had dropped to close to zero by 1920. Industrialist Charles M. Schwab invested heavily in Rhyolite's infrastructure, which boasted a school, electric lights, water mains, newspapers, a hospital, and even an opera house, some of which can be seen today. There are only around 10 significant structures, yet the site is very evocative. The crumbling remains set against a backdrop of stark desert hills. In at number 3 we have Jazira Al-Hamra, which is best known as the ghost town of the United Arab Emirates, is said to be the country's most haunted place, remaining a number of spooky events experienced by the locals and curious visitors. Jazira Al-Hamra is an abandoned village located to the south of the city of Ras Al Khaimah, one of the 7 emirates that form the UAE. The coastal territory is the region's best example of a pre-oil village, displaying 3 distinct types of early and mid-20th century Gulf architecture. The town of Ras Al Khaimah is the crumbling remains of a once thriving fishing village. The name translates to Red Island for the red and bronze color of the sand on which the town was built. The former tidal island was predominantly home to the Zab tribe, who by 1831 developed the area into a renowned pearling trade center. It was home to over 4,000 inhabitants and dozens of fishing and trading ships, and with its good fortune came expansion that continued well into the start of the 20th century. But by 1968, Al-Jazirat Al-Hamra became nothing more than an abandoned town, due to a clash between the tribe and Sheikh Saka bin Mohammed of Ras Al Khaimah due to some unclear reasons. Thus, most of them migrated to Abu Dhabi. The village consisted of 334 buildings, including 18 shops and 11 mosques, and is nearly unchanged since its people left in 1968. Al-Jazirat Al-Hamra, now filled-in patch of land in the south of Ras Al Khaimah, remained abandoned and untouched. However, rumor has it that this extraordinary quiet and silent village is extremely haunted by the jinns. People even gossip that they can hear the strange noise and disembodied voices near the beach of this ghost village. Many visitors also assert that they felt uneasy, like danger was lurking, waiting for them when they pressed on further into the haunted village. Some of them even claim to have reported seeing unexplainable handprints on the ruined pillars and walls, and experienced many more paranormal things within this haunted ghost town. In at number 2 we have Pyramid in Norway. Some say that the Soviet town of Pyramid in Norway was abandoned overnight, and for a good reason. Located in Svalbard, an archipelago situated between Norway and the North Pole, Pyramiden can be reached by boat from about mid-May until the beginning of October, when waters bordering the town are free from deep-sea ice. Established in the 17th century, the town was used as a base for whaling and walrus trapping. Though at the start of the 20th century the culture shifted to coal mining. At first, Pyramiden was a sleepy place with hardly any residents at all, but after World War II the Soviets allocated more money to the town. They constructed dozens of new buildings, including a hospital, a recreation center called the Cultural Palace, and a large cafeteria. In the 1980s, the town's population reached its peak of more than 1,000 people, but not long, due to the wake of the Soviet Union's dissolution, the town would be left completely abandoned. As when the Soviet Union fell apart, mining stopped in Pyramiden, and the miners had to leave. On March 31st, 1998, the last coal was extracted from the mine, and the approximately 300 workers who still lived there began shipping out. The residents never returned, and today the town still stands much as it was when the last men departed. And finally, in at number 1 we have Batzo Village, New Jersey. There are around 28 known ghost towns in New Jersey, but this one has to be the most terrifying. Founded in 1766, the Batzo Village was built primarily to accommodate once prosperous ironworks. At the time, the site possessed 3 valuable resources: water for mills, abundant wood for charcoal, and naturally occurring bog iron. During the Revolutionary War, Batzo supplied the Continental Army with iron, while its remoteness protected it from British attack. In 1784, Batzo was bought by William Richard, whose family owned and operated the ironworks for 92 years. Following the discovery of coal and ore in Pennsylvania, in the 1840s the iron industry began to dwindle in the Batzo village. Nervous they were going to run out of business, the Richards family exploited another abundant local resource, sand, to make glass. But in 1874 a house fire spread and destroyed the glass making facilities, remaining furnaces, and 17 houses that were in the town. Due to the destruction of the glass facilities, the town of Batzo and the Richards family fell into bankruptcy. The Richards and many of the villagers moved away after the accident, leaving the site silent. In 1876, the property, along with huge tracts of land around it, was purchased by industrialist and businessman Joseph Wharton, with the plan of reinventing the declining town into an agricultural, foresting, and cranberry farm. But after his death in 1909, the land was held by a trust until purchased by the state in 1954 to form the Wharton State Forest. The state's plan for the town was to restore its 50-room mansion, as well as to rebuild the dam that was located on the lake, though the efforts to reinvent Batzo weren't enough to save it from its inevitable end. As when the state of New Jersey bought the village with a plan of improving it, the residents didn't see a future in the town, so they all left it, with roots that can be traced back to 1766 and the last remaining resident leaving in 1989. There are more than 40 structures still standing in the historic town, including a charcoal kiln, carriage houses, stables, ice and milk houses, a blacksmith, general store, gristmill, and a wheelwright shop, though they are all left untouched since the last residents left in 1989.